Yo, everybody, welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer and artist team behind the just-released graphic novel, Everyone is Tulip. It's Dave Baker and Nicole Goux. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so we're recording this the day after Everyone is Tulip is released. How was day one?
It was pretty surreal, man. I was surprised. Like, we've been doing a lot of press leading up, which has been a lot of fun. And then Nicole came up with this really fun idea of like she made these little like paper doll drawings of the main character from the book, Becca, and got a bunch of our friends to draw outfits on the main character. And like seeing like however many it's been, 50, 100, 7,000, 100 million, I don't know anymore because numbers and time don't mean anything in a pandemic world. It was so cool to just like, holy shit, like look at all these people that we know and some that we don't, and everybody's drawing our character. This is so cool.
Yeah, whether that meme has any actual impact on sales of the book or whether it actually got it to like one more person that wouldn't have known about it kind of doesn't matter, because getting to see all our friends draw little outfits on our character was just so much fun. And It was nice because it made the release day feel big, where it's like, we had a bunch of people just tweeting about the book randomly, or, like being like, hey, this is out today. I have these friends who made this thing. Cool, great, whatever. But to kind of like actively have people posting about it all day just made it really feel like a big deal. I have a hard time sometimes internalizing the fact that we've made a book and that people can read it. And so having all these people kind of acknowledge that was a really nice feeling.
I thought it was a really smart idea, and especially given the subject of the book and the fact that, Tulip is constantly making elaborate costume changes. It was a really, really good idea for it. I do have to ask, was part of the marketing plan all along running into Patton Oswalt at Golden Apple Comics, or is that just completely spontaneous?
Yeah, I'm flattered by the fact that you think that Nicole and I taking a photo with Patton posing with the book, I'm flattered that you think that is in our realm to orchestrate. I don't know who you think we are, but I want to be those people for you. I'm gonna
live in LA, but we don't know Patton Oswalt.
What? I thought everybody, they always people are always asking me like, oh, do you know this person in Alaska? I'm like, do you have any idea how big Alaska is? I mean, it's not quite the same as LA because there is let's say a few more people there, but at the same time I understand. It was very nice timing, though. I think he was there to like sign MODOK stuff, and you also got a little bit of push for Everyone is Tulip out of that. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, we basically were just there to pick up the book, and see it on a shelf and just kind of like, whoa, it's so cool. Look at that. It's our thing. It makes it feel real to see like people we don't know interacting with our thing that we've been working on for years. And he was, yeah, like you said, he was just signing a bunch of MODOK merch and stuff. And I was just like, what if come on, we have to,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Right? We have to, right? And then we did, and he was very nice. Very nice.
I love it. Okay, so today we're going to be doing something a little bit different as we're going to talk about Everything is Tulip from concept to release. Before we get into that, let's start with what it's all about for listeners that don't know. Everyone is Tulip is your new Dark Horse graphic novel with Dave writing, Nicole on art and letters, although as we're going to get into, I'm guessing it was a little bit more fluid than specific roles and everything. And Ellie Hall colored it. The solicit, let's do the solicit. It's a beast, so I'm gonna do it for you guys. Becca Harper lands in an acting role she didn't think would go anywhere and suddenly finds herself flung into 15 minutes of fame. The Caesar likeness not up in lights, but in memes, reaction videos, and even conspiracy theories. Donning the guise of Tulip for an experimental artsy video directed by an affluent jerk that she somehow ends up dating, Becca's dreams seem to have come true when her persona becomes the talk of the internet. With a sudden army of fans, complications arise when Becca begins to question whether or not she has the right to consider herself a star. So I want to start before we actually get into the book. I loved it. I thought it was absolutely incredible. As a person who is a child of the internet and spends far too much time on it, it was very, very smart, very funny, and just very well done. And honestly, we'll get into this a little bit as far as we can get into it without spoilers, but it is straight up one of the best endings of any comic I've ever read. The last page is like murder. It is so killer. Anyway, so but let's get to the beginning. I know the origins from the back. Dave's right up in the back. I know the origins of Tulip are connected to a European trip that you took that was built around tabling at Thought Bubble, and that back in pre-pandemic times, I would always run into you at conventions. You're everywhere. You're always traveling to and from conventions. I'm curious as to when it comes to like idea generation, are those, you're taking these big trips, you're going to different places, you're going to Edinburgh, you're going to all these different places. Are those trips usually serious times of like idea generation for you two? Not just because of the energy of conventions, but also because we got a lot of time to kill. I imagine you're just talking a lot about everything in your brains.
Yeah, I think like I see this thing about plane travel a lot, where I love plane travel because it allows you to disconnect from any of the obligations of your normal life, because theoretically, this has changed now, but you can't be on your phone, you can't be on your laptop, any deadlines that you have to wait because you're literally on a plane. You can't do anything. So that's your opportunity to read that novel that you've been putting off reading, or, just stare out the window and kind of simmer in your own juices or whatever it is. And I think that, I don't know if I would say that the origins of the ideas come from trips like that, but the like rumination and discussions often are we spend a lot of time kind of digging into ideas in those kind of liminal spaces.
Yeah, David, I want you to know that on that trip that you're talking about, where we went to Thought Bubble, and then after Thought Bubble hung out in Europe for a couple weeks and went to Paris and hung out, and we had just published our previous book, Fuck Off Squad, which came out through Silver Sprocket. So we were talking about what we wanted to do next, and that conversation kind of evolved into Tulip. Most of that time was spent with me reading Nicholas Meyer's autobiography, A View from the Bridge, which is his book about writing Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. So real high-minded shit over here, man. I'm just Nikki My.
I love it.
Performance artists, like. Yeah, there was because around that time there was a lot of these people, these like internet performance artists, like Bo Burnham's Inside special has now kind of taken the internet by storm through Netflix, and he was around before that, but around that time he was really gaining a lot of prominence and transitioning into, in air quotes, legitimate media. But there's a lot of performance artist people that were kind of similar to him that started online and go other places, like Poppy, Belle Delphine, Bella Porch, Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a big one for us that we really like, which is a Muppet performance art group. They make really weird, surrealist YouTube videos, which if you're not familiar, please go watch Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Very good.
So you were just kind of diving into that world. Nicole, what you're saying there about like the disconnect, I do think that's really interesting because, one of my favorite random parts of Everyone is Tulip is there's like a double page spread that you two did where Becca is on a bus and it just shows like everything that's going along and she's just like showing her engagement on social media. And it's really interesting because that's something that we fill so much of our time with. It's just mindless kind of liking, mindless kind of engagement. Social media professionals like myself, because I work in an advertising agency, are always in pursuit of engagement, but a lot of it's really kind of mindless. And like I love train travel for the same reason why you love plane travel. It's another reason you disconnect, you just kind of focus on things you've been enjoying, whether or not that's what was it, Nicholas My, or Wrath of Khan King, him writing about that, and then like performance artists. It is interesting because it's I'm sure a million people have asked you about like the origins of the idea and everything. That's one of those things. It's like sometimes you're just on a train or on a plane and you have these other influences in your head and it just kind of brews up into something super weird that ends up being Everyone is Tulip.
Yeah, because the discussions were kind of around the aesthetic of a lot of these videos originally, where Nicole was kind of drawing some of these people, and a lot of the stuff that we make kind of starts that way. Usually, it's either Nicole drawing something or me having an idea for like a formalist comics language, like visual mechanic, and then us kind of like bouncing it back and forth and like, oh, what if it looked more like this, or what if we did that? So there was a lot of her drawing Tulip and exploring that visually, which then developed into the book.
It was initially more about like the vibe of these things and the feel of these things, and then it kind of morphed over that trip from like a story about like what these YouTube characters are like, to what the people behind the characters are like. And that just came from spending a bunch of time talking about it and like what it was, what it needed to be, what kind of story we wanted to tell. And you can only really figure those things out through lots of time and thinking about a thing, you know?
And originally it was going to be like the story was drastically different. It was going to be more like a Satoshi Kon movie. It was going to be more like, you know, Perfect Blue or Millennium Actress, where it's going to be like this like idea that when you're lost in social media, you lose a grip on reality, and that was going to be manifested physically by like the Tulip character becoming a separate sentient person, and like the main character having to deal with that person in some way, which obviously is thematically a part of the book, but is not
literally,
not literally, not the paprika dream sequence that we were talking about maybe being.
Yeah.
Well, so okay, you listed in your afterword some ideas that you might have taken in a different direction. There's like all these different ideas you're toying with. Did you know immediately when you were kind of, Nicole, you were sketching, you guys were just kind of riffing on what exactly this idea could be, performance artists, all that stuff. Did you know immediately that maybe this idea was a little different and something that you wanted to push a little further on to see how it developed from there?
For me, I think it comes down to like finding the perfect balance between the theme and the execution. Like we had talked about these different art styles, these different narrative mechanics, and then when we had kind of hit on a couple key visual mechanics, one of them being that Nicole would draw the character of Becca in a more kind of like American indie comic style, and then the character of Tulip in like a shoujo manga style with larger eyes, no wider mouth. That's when it was like, oh, okay, so it's not bombastic in its surreality. It's like it's minor key David Lynch subtle changes. Oh, okay. And so then that little component warped everything else to like pull it in. You know what I mean? It's that little detail was just so like that was the key that turned for me anyway. I don't know about Nicole.
I think it's also just very like emotional based. We have all these back burner projects. We have like 6 things we want to do at any moment, and so much of it is about I'm excited about this right now. Like we have all these stories, and some of them are cool, and some of them are I'm excited about this aspect of them or whatever. But like, what are we feeling right now? I'm excited about drawing this character. I'm excited about exploring this story a little bit more. And that's something that's actually gotten a lot more complicated since we've been pitching to larger publishers, because when you're self-publishing, if you're excited about something, you can just make it. And that's actually what we did with this initially, is we just started making it and then we pitched it to people. But now, we make these pitches, we spend all this time, we spend months or weeks developing a story, making a pitch, doing sample pages, and then we send it out, and then you wait. And then like a year later, maybe someone is like, hey, you remember that thing that you pitched me 2 years ago or a year ago? Let's make that now. And then you're like, yeah, but I've moved on, bro. Like, I'm not excited about that anymore. I want to do this other thing. And you have to kind of go back to that idea and remember what was exciting about it for you. Whereas when we made Tulip, we were excited about it, the 2 of us, and then we made it, despite having these other things. It just happened to be the thing that we were both really vibing on.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Nicole, that I think that people really forget is that, especially for like graphic novels, we look at these things and we're just like, oh yeah, like this is an awesome thing. It just came out and everything like that. But you've probably been done with this for what, 6 months, a year?
At least 6 months.
6 months.
If not more. Yeah.
And then on top of that, it sounds like the original concept of it kind of, I mean, what year of Thought Bubble was that?
Ooh, 2017.
Dang. Yeah. So you've been sitting with this for
2016, and then we started drawing it in 2017 because Thought Bubble's in like October or something, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was 17, but I'm not sure. It was whatever year.
Tulip is in my 2017 file, which means I probably started putting files on the computer. You're your script, my first sketches, and all that stuff in 2017.
So you did Batgirl within this.
Yes, which is one of the reasons this took so long.
Right.
Is that I drew an entire 180-page book in the middle of making this, So between the physical time it takes to make a book and then the time it takes to deal with publishers and get contracts and wait for printing and do PR and all this stuff, that's the reason it's such an extended amount of time working on it. Because obviously I spent, I was drawing 5 pages a week for Batgirl during this and just getting it, whatever I could, done on Tulip at the time.
Mm-hmm. So you had, from what I read, you did the initial colors. It was like, I think 8 to 10 page pitch or something like that for Tulip. How far into the book were you before you really, was it just those 8 to 10 pages before you started pitching, or Dave, were you way further into that?
I had written the whole thing. I had written, I think, a final draft of the full thing, but I might have just written a final draft of the first 3 chapters, which is like 90 pages or so. And then while Nicole was drawing that stuff, I might have been re-massaging the end. I kind of don't remember the timeline exactly, but let's just say I had, in air quotes, written the whole thing. Nicole was probably like
halfway done.
Yeah, she was, when we started pitching, you were like halfway done?
Oh, no, probably when we started pitching to Dark Horse, because we started pitching this significantly earlier. I kind of forgot that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we had talked to a couple people, and then things just didn't click or whatever. Things moved on, you know how it is. And then
probably like an issue in, let's say.
Yeah.
When we started pitching it.
When we started pitching it was like about an issue. And then when we started talking with Dark Horse, you were probably about 60-ish pages maybe in.
That sounds right. Sure.
Yeah.
I have to say, one of the tricky things with a subject like this is that it's like if you try to do something that's built off of like YouTube and off of like social media and everything like that, and if you do it wrong, if you fake it the wrong way, it's going to seem super fake. And
yeah.
I got to give you 2 credit. I'm afraid of how much YouTube you've watched in your lives, because you nailed it completely. Like, I'm pretty sure, I'm going to hold this up. No one can see this, so it's terrible podcasting. But at the same time, there's like the opening page that is like the YouTube homepage for the channel and everything like that. I am like 95% certain I have listened to that lo-fi hip hop radio channel.
Some of that stuff is because like I know that this is popular and I've listened to it myself while making the book.
Right.
I listened to this while making this book, and now it's in the book, and it's like this weird full circle thing. But yeah, that stuff is really fun because that's the stuff that comes like at the very end. I'm not planning end papers when I start drawing a book, and then getting to kind of be like, ooh, what can we put in the like end papers or the extra stuff or in the back that would make this feel fuller? It's fun. It's really fun to figure that stuff out.
But even beyond that, I do want to talk about the fact that you nailed the inane specificity of YouTube comment burns freakishly well. This is the weirdest thing to ever say spoiler about. But Becca is she is picked on about her wrists, and at one point the phrase #wristfatty is used, and it's weird because like I swear every comment thing always latches onto something really weird. Like, for example, one of the most negative reviews about this very podcast is the fact that I have a tendency of talking to guests about sports. And this person was like, if he wants to talk about sports, have a sports podcast. Stop doing it with comic people. And I'm like, but they contain multitudes. But
no, David, only comic people can be one-dimensional. They can't like anything other than comics.
Only comics. But I do like the specificity you got into with all that stuff. Not just like the in papers, but it really feels like I don't know. I'm really, like I said, I'm afraid of how much YouTube you watch. Specifically you, Dave. I'm guessing you dug deep. You're like one of the few people I actually know who is in comics and also has a TikTok. So I feel like this is up your alley anyways.
Well, that also comes from Dave making YouTube stuff. So
right.
Like, some comment bullshit comes from like, for his job, he makes videos and there's shitty comments on that stuff, Yeah. That's experiential.
Yeah, I work at a media company as a writer producer as my day job, and for a long time we were making like movie and comics content for one of our verticals, and uh, there was the wrist fatty thing comes directly from something that happened to me where I had made a video about Alan Moore that had gone for our channel pretty viral. I think we had like 250 or 300,000 views on this channel, or on this video of me talking about Alan Moore and Watchmen and the various controversies surrounding DC Comics' treatment of the Watchmen and of Alan Moore specifically. And one of the things is for some reason, they just latched on to the fact that my face looks like the face of a beta. And I don't
like a beta fish.
I know what that. No, like a beta, like as in someone who is not an alpha.
Oh my
like,
God.
It's the internet, and it's like, you have to be a fucking alpha, bro.
What does the face of a beta look like? Don't say yourself, Dave. Don't say yourself.
I have no idea. But the funny thing about it is that my whole department got so like, it was actually very charming and very sweet. And my department that I work in they got very protective of me, and they were all like in the comments, like fighting with these like incel douchebags, and they all changed their default icons on Slack to a little logo that says Beta Boys, and they all refer to themselves as the Beta Boys now. It's very sweet.
Yeah.
And very, very nice. But it's that kind of stuff where like the internet just like latches onto something, like you said, and then just like tries to pummel the person with it. And luckily, I'm a very secure person. Like, I don't really think that there's anything that somebody in a YouTube comment thread is gonna, say about me that I'm really gonna worry about too much. It's not that big a deal. But that flattening of the deeply subjective human experience into ones and zeros, and weaponizing it against someone and trying to punch down at them, is something that is a very potent and universal concept online, which is in the book with a very pointed reason.
And now, a message from Bad Idea. Bad Idea is over. But there's still advertising, so I don't know what's going on. I guess it's another bad idea from Bad Idea. And now, back to the show. I mean, it's really interesting to see, it's like, you look at something like the Nosedive episode of Black Mirror, which is like very much focused on social media points, basically, and how that affects your life. That was 5 years ago, and that already is a thing that happens. I mean, like that's just reality. And that's one of the interesting, I mean, one of the things I like about what you two did with Tulip is, the personal brands, influencers, like the importance of your social presence to social status and hireability. Those are omnipresent ideas. And I don't know, it's interesting because you did it in a way that works perfectly with the comic book medium, but it still feels very present and very accurate to the way things actually are. Was that, I mean, for the two of you, is that an aspect of the world that just is kind of interesting to you? I mean, Nicole, I know you said specifically that before we started recording, in regards to something else, you were maybe the less tech savvy between the two of you. I mean, is that something you find fascinating?
I do think it's really interesting. And it's something that, because I'm not very good at the social thing, I think I kind of like, I just think it's such a strange world that exists and that we all are a part of, but some people are, and this is, like probably like 90% luck and 10% like actual skill of doing this.
Right.
Some people just, they get lucky and then their thing explodes, and then, it's something that we talk about a lot in comics, I think, because there's this disconnect between number of followers and actually getting jobs.
Right.
So when you have 60,000 followers, companies look at that and they're like, ooh, that's cool. I'm going to publish the book from this person. But it doesn't always translate to people buying books. It doesn't always translate to you getting work. There's so many people who on the internet will be like, so-and-so shouldn't be asking for work on the internet because they have 60,000 followers. Like, they don't need help. When it's like, we're all cartoonists. Nobody has work. Nobody has money. Like, so there's this weird disconnect between what it looks like you are on the internet and what you really are in real life. Or these people who are like incredible, amazing working cartoonists who have 2,000 followers. you're a fucking legend, and you have no followers because, either you're bad at the internet or you were popular in the 80s or, whatever it is. And so the disconnect between literally being a, intelligent, productive person, a successful person, and being quote unquote successful on the internet. I'm always seeing these people who are like, I'm still in art school and I have 40,000 followers. And I'm like, how? How did you do that? I've been working for like 7 years to get followers and I have 5,000 followers. It just is so weird to me and I don't understand it. And I think because of that, I'm like, how? I want to know more. How do we tell a story about how weird this is?
It is interesting, Dave. I'm sure you were going to jump in there, but I mean, one thing I think is really interesting is the Instagram effect. The idea that like within like the square, within the reel, within whatever, that's who you are. But in reality, it's like, in the book, Becca just sort of starts becoming Tulip, which culminates in the end, as if like the brand has become more pervasive than the actual human underneath. It's like a Schrodinger's human type situation. Are you the brand or are you the person? And that's one of the things I found so fascinating about it, is because it's like there's like two levels in the story. It's one, it's how this type of situation changes a person, how much, like, who is real, Becca or is it Tulip? And then on top of that, it's like somebody like Pandora XL who's straight up abusive and is like, pushing her in a position in a weird way. It's like his art exhibit is less to do with Tulip and more to do with like, can he functionally change a human into something else? And it's a very I say fascinating in a way that makes it an interesting read, not because it's like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think there's, especially with the Stanley character, like the pseudonym his pseudonym is Paradox XL.
Sorry, I keep saying Pandora.
No worries. But the guy Stanley, like there's very few sequences in the book where he's not in character, and the moments where he's not in character as Paradox XL are very specific moments, which I'm trying to talk around things.
Yeah, I get you.
But like, I mean, and that's kind of a thing that's a recurring theme and motif through the whole work, is like everybody is playing a character. It's just if you, the audience member, are kind of savvy enough to realize when they're playing what character. So there's, Becca, who's an actor who kind of gets sucked up into this world of performance art and then becomes this Tulip character who then starts, like you're saying, using the Tulip persona to do things in her life that Becca would not be capable of doing. And then there's another character that's a supporting character named Eve, who is Becca's roommate, who's more of kind of like a classically trained actor. She probably comes from a little bit more of a affluent background. And her character, it kind of uses the same thing, where she has a socialite persona, where she's almost like, there's an expectation for how an actor in LA works when they're not working, where they go to parties and they're coquettish and they're very dynamic and they're playing the game, as it were. And so she is slipping in and out of that paradigm as well. And everybody in the book has a different version of themselves that they're toggling back and forth between in order to try and make substantial gains in whatever career trajectory they're trying to do. And that's interesting to me because I've A, seen it, B, had to do it, and C, had to come to terms with the fact that living in Los Angeles and trying to do things in a creative industry is it's not easy, right? You're going to be presented with no-win scenarios. You're going to be presented with compromises. I think every artist's true medium is compromise, and it's how they deal with that and how they navigate that situation that defines their longevity and cultural impact.
I like that you have measuring stick characters in there to a certain degree for Becca in particular. Like there's Jack, her ex, who's back in Arizona and is living a normal life. But then on top of that, probably the most savage and one of the most sad moments in the entire book is basically Tulip runs into a person that was previously in her life from, I believe, Arizona, and he knows nothing, or excuse me, Becca does, and he knows nothing about Tulip, and basically he just, I mean, all he has to say to her is, "You're borderline hot now," and it's just like, it's such a savage moment, because it's just, he, in a weird way, like, she wants to be valued as Tulip, but he's valuing her in a completely different and not great way, and it's just, it's such a, I don't know, there's an interesting sadness to the book, and maybe that's just me looking at the social media in a way, but
it's totally there. I mean, for me, my rubric for every scenario when we're making these things is like, and Nicole has to kind of mitigate this sometimes and like dial it back, but my gut instinct at all times is, well, what is the saddest version of this?
You learned that from Nikki My My, right?
Yeah, Nikki My My. Yeah, totally.
I mean, I think there is something to be said for that. Like, when you're making a book, you want emotional impact. Right. And so a way to do that is to make it fucking sad. And I like books that are sad. But there is a limit to that, where it's like, especially with this book, when we started out, we had to massage it a little bit, because the characters, it was a little bit too dark, I think, where nobody liked each other, nobody got along, nobody whatever, and it was hard to feel sympathy for any of the characters. And I think pulling that back a little bit and putting some more positivity into the book actually made the emotional impact more, because when you care about someone, or you can see how they're being manipulated, then that's going to affect you when things go wrong in a deeper way.
Yeah, and I think Nicole was totally right. Like, there's a couple other books that are somewhat thematically like this in the marketplace, which I actually really like. But the main complaint or critique that Nicole and I have had when reading them is like, I can tell that the creators love this character, but I don't love this character because the person is so shitty. And I love complex, shitty characters, as long as there's what Nicole's talking about, where there's peaks and valleys, there's mitigating factors, there's scars. You know, it's not just the person is inherently fucking annoying or evil or whatever, but they're that way for a reason. And so we really worked to try and develop all of the characters, not just Becca, to have very clear and very conflicting needs and wants.
Yeah, I mean, there were drafts of this book where Eve was very one note and just kind of the shitty roommate out to get her own and like fuck Becca, do anything to, get famous. And I think what we ended up with, where you can see why she's doing it. You can see that, like, this is all she's ever wanted, and her roommate, who she was on good terms with, they're friends, is getting it, and it feels like it's easy for her. Like, why is it easy for her when I've worked so hard for this?
Right.
And so being able to see kind of the code of the matrix of, like, you're not just a shitty person, you're doing this because you feel hurt, or you feel, robbed of your opportunities, or you feel this or that. Like, and I think each of these characters has that dichotomy of, like, are you doing a shitty thing? Yes. Do we know why you're doing it? Also, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think a really great scene, a really great panel in specific that you did, Nicole, to kind of exemplify that is there's this moment where Becca is on the red carpet with Stanley, and this is the moment that Tulip's been waiting for. She's the star. And who's over there? Eve. And she is literally staring daggers at her. Like, it's just like a really nice touch. And I like that. Like, that's a moment where I understand where both characters are coming from. And I can feel that. I mean, deep down, like, a lot of the people are kind of despicable at times, but at the same time, you can empathize with them, which is crucial. I do have to ask, okay, you two have worked together quite a bit. Dave, you're an artist as well as a writer. I'm interested in how that affects your process when it comes to actually making the book. It's easy to guess, attribution is always tough with comics, but Dave, you're the writer. Nicole, you're the artist. Was it a lot more fluid than just that as you're developing it?
Yeah, I mean, especially with this book, I think as we've worked together, it has become progressively more fluid. Where initially it was a little more half and half, Dave writes, I draw. And as we've made more and more books together and spent more time together and done this and that, a lot of that gets kind of mushy in the middle, where it's like, oh, we landed on this because I was excited about this idea. And then, we talked about it for a really long time. And so those ideas are kind of inextricable at a certain point, where like, I don't even know who had what idea. And then Dave will go and sit down and write the whole thing. He absolutely writes the whole script, but he leaves opportunities for me to expand on stuff or change stuff or do this or that. And then I'll read the script afterwards and then give my notes and suggestions, and we talk about it, and he does other passes. And the same thing with the art, where I show him every thumbnail before I draw a page. And he has the opportunity to say, like, hey, I don't think that really works, or what if we did this? Oftentimes in the middle of a book, we will add stuff. Dave will be like, ooh, what if we added this scene here and did this? Or I came up with this mechanic. How can we use that? Or I will add stuff because I'm like, I think that this works better, or we need an extra breathing moment here. So it's really hard to be like, this is split down the middle.
Right. Well, I think that one of the things that makes that really interesting is silence is used really well in the book. I mentioned that bus scene before where where Becca is engaging with social media on her phone. But there's a number of scenes where either silence is used, or like one scene I really liked that I think some people might have cut out just because like the economics of creating comics. It's like, do you really want to use a double page spread on what random people at a party in Los Angeles are talking about when they're talking about like rubbing avocados all over their body, or like, the the box office openings and stuff like that. Is that something like,
David, it's really important. It's really important for the world building of Tulip for us to know what The Lurker 3: Dark Cabinet's Revenge made at the box office. Like, we gotta know that.
You had a billboard earlier in the book of the Lurkers, so I do want to point out that was, I feel like Nicole was setting us up for that.
Yeah. I mean, the Lurker, I don't know how many of our books you have read, but the Lurker is an ongoing Dave and Nicole extended universe character. It shows up in basically everything that we do in some way or another. Usually small in the background. Posters,
I love it.
Yeah, it's basically like he's like the equivalent of kind of like the Phantom or something, where he's like a pulp character from like the 40s who was created by a cartoonist, and then the cartoonist lost the rights to the character, and he's now owned by some sort of corporation that just keeps making all of these movies and TV shows and things about him. And he's always on posters or on TV, or like the main character in our book Fuck Off Squad wears a Lurker t-shirt for the majority of the book. Like he's always like around just peripherally. And maybe I keep trying to convince Nicole to let us like actually like make an actual Lurker comic. and she always says the same thing. Yeah.
Do you say he should draw it?
Yes.
It's not the same though if I draw it, because it needs to be us. Like, it's got to be.
Well, maybe I'll write it then.
The fact that you have so much information about this character that is just basically like the extended universe.
Where the writer's grave is.
What's that?
Yeah. We know where the writer is buried, like within our universe.
Oh my God, that's
to that extent. Like, we know a lot about that.
This is incredible.
Yeah, in our next book that's coming out from Simon and Schuster, there's like a map of the city that the comic takes place in, and there's a graveyard, and in the graveyard there's a little call out caption that's like, the creator of the Lurker, I forget his name now, it's like Preston Forrest something the third.
Oh my God.
He's buried in Forest Hills, which is the city that our next book takes place in. Yeah.
I absolutely love this, but
this is so dorky. No one's ever going to care about the Lurker except for me and Nicole. And honestly, I don't even know that Nicole gives too much, really.
She doesn't want to draw it.
Yeah, she doesn't want to draw the book.
I like it as a, like, I don't have to think about what these posters are thing. You know? Mm-hmm. Like, instead of having to come up with some silly, clever thing all the time, I'm like, oh, let's make the Lurker.
Yeah. This feels reflective of the fact that Dave's podcast is called Deep Cuts. I mean, it's just like everything is a deep cut. But okay, so going back to the central idea though, like the silence and all of that, Nicole, is that kind of what you're talking about, where it's like maybe you can stretch out something into a double page spread that was originally something smaller?
Yeah. So I one of my favorite things in comics is atmosphere and world building and just quiet moments. And Dave knows that about me. So if you've ever read like This One Summer or those kinds of, Jillian Tamaki is like a master at that. And when I read that book, I was like, this is all I ever wanted in a comic, is to just like see birds on a fucking wire and like pebbles on the ground. And I think it adds so much and really helps you focus on a moment and kind of sit with it. And so there's places in the book where Dave will just write that into the script. You know, this is, you know, a double page spread of Tulip's hair blowing in the wind or whatever it is. And then there's places where I'm like, what if we took this, you know, blood thing that's happening and make it an entire page, you know? And so it's kind of half and half of like literally being in the script because Dave knows that I like that and writes his scripts for me. And half of it is us, either Dave coming up with something later or me being like, I want to pull this apart. And the nice thing about making a quote unquote graphic novel is that you have the time and space. You're not restricted to those 22 pages where you gotta tell your fucking story in that amount of time and do it quickly because you have to do another issue next month, you know? So making a book of indeterminate length with indeterminate release date allows you to take that space, take the space that this story needs, which I am very grateful that we were able to do this in this format because of that.
Yeah, I mean, the two things that I would just add on are, one, that we literally have a term for those silent moments that you're talking about. It's called the Nicole Goux sad girl hair blowing in the wind moment. And I literally will just say that to her in the description of a panel, and I'm like, do your whole Nicole Goux sad girl with the hair blowing in the wind moment here. Even if it's not like hair blowing in the wind literally,
right?
She knows what that means. Although there is literally one of those moments in this book. There's a moment where Becca is at a mansion that Stanley owns, theoretically.
Is it the sunset?
Yeah, dude.
Oh, I love that page. That's a really good page. Like with the three panels down the middle.
Yep.
Oh my God. Yeah, I have that in my notes as something I wanted to bring up. Yeah, I mean, I love those things because it gives you a second to like kind of drink in the details and also feel the moment. And like that way, like whatever comes next is going to like hit you a little bit harder. And I love how you all approach that. So I'm appreciative of you including those moments for Nicole to freelance, Dave. And I appreciate you nailing those moments, Nicole.
Yeah, this is like nitty gritty weird comics behind the scenes bullshit. But like every once in a while we'll be like working on a book and some page turn doesn't really work out or some spread doesn't line up in the right way and we need to add a page. And those are the perfect opportunity to add an atmosphere page.
Yeah.
And I love that shit where it's like, this could be seen as a mistake in scripting, but I don't ever see it that way because then you get the opportunity to kind of like find some space in your story.
Yeah. The other thing about that too is that a lot of the spatial elements that you're talking about, these atmosphere things, are directly the counterbalance to the hard grid comics mechanics, whatever the thing is that we're obsessed with in the book. Like specifically with Tulip, we played around heavily with this idea that a 9-panel grid is the same shape as a cell phone, so you can pattern layouts where you can have phones making an X or phones making a diamond inside of the layout of a 9-panel grid, which you can then use to thematically express when characters are, addicted to their phones, or when things are off balance, or when things are feeling more kind of pristine because the composition itself is symmetrical. And so those kind of very dense mechanical gear-like narrative functionality things, you need something else to balance that out with. And that's where we get in, the other side of things, the emotional moments, the sad moments, the Nicole Goux, sad girls, hair blowing in the wind moments.
Yeah, it's like a flavor changer, like a palate cleanser, a little bit on
Yeah.
those, which I
Yeah,
think
you got to
is
get the sweet and the salty.
the sweet and salty. I like it.
So many of Dave and my books kind of originate from these mechanical formalist ideas because we're both so fascinated by that, and the things that you can do in comics that you can't do other places, and try to explore that. And so we do that pretty heavily. So you got to kind of give the reader something else too.
Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick second to talk about Macroverse. Macroverse is a next-gen mobile comics app, with its tap story format making comics feel totally native on mobile devices, which you can experience over 45 series and 400 episodes, with more launching all the time. It's a perfect time to try it out, too. Many of the most popular titles like Hex 11, Deadtown, Glitch, and more are free for a limited time only, so download the app for iOS or Android and binge away. Oh, and keep an eye out on macroverse.com for some major updates on new creators, new series, and new features that bring real collectability to digital comics in a new way. Massive things are coming. If you love making, reading, and or collecting comics, you won't want to miss what Macroverse is launching this summer. And now, back to the show. Okay, I know you've actually, I'm pretty sure Dave just did a video about why Dark Horse the other day. I'm not going to ask that, but I am interested in, let's say like 10 years ago, the comics market has matured quite a bit even since then. But it is kind of interesting because Tulip is not, I don't know if I would call it YA, but I don't know if I wouldn't call it. I mean, it's in like...
It's weird, like, it's a weird middle ground where I would probably call it like new adult.
Yeah.
But that's like not commercially proven yet.
Right.
Like there's not
it's not even
franchise.
It's like there's no spot for it in the bookstores.
Right.
And so it doesn't get categorized as that. I mean, that's the realm that Dave and I and so many of our friends really want to play in and figure out, and what our books tend to be, but it's just like a weird marketing thing that nobody wants to call it new adult.
Yeah, I mean, it is weird because like one of the things that people always talk about is like, how do you transition readers from like, you get readers who are reading Scholastic Graphics and then like First Second and manga and stuff like that. What is the next step for them? Like, where do you put them? And it's like, you don't send them to superhero comics. What is the adult comics? And it's odd that this is such like a mystifying idea, but it is kind of funny because when I was thinking about it, it's like, when I was trying to put together a theoretical list of who you would pitch this book to, because it's not quite YA, but it's not really a direct market focused book. It's like, when you were figuring out who you wanted to pitch it to, like what was your discussion? Was it kind of like, I guess it's Dark Horse, or what was it?
The discussion between the two of us was like, we need somebody who's going to be able to see the potential in the book, be able to see like, oh, okay, the Nicole is a proven commodity. She's got, a bat cowl that she's drawn. So people are like, yeah, Nicole Goux, cool. they're not, they're not betting on me. You know what I mean? They're betting on Nicole. Like I've done a ton of indie work. I've run multiple successful Kickstarters. And since we've signed the book, I've worked on Star Trek and, worked on stuff for Cartoon Network and done all this cool stuff. I'm very proud of it. It's great, blah, blah, blah. But if we're going back to like the moment when we were like, how the fuck do we set this specific book up? I mean, I don't. It was a little bit of just like, well, let's just show it to everybody and see who we can convince.
Yeah.
Well, the other part of that conversation that gets a little complicated is there are places that this would fit that we're not willing to publish books.
Right.
Because of their deals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a combination of like, let's pitch it to everyone and see what happens.
But within your parameters.
Maybe not these however many publishers. And then, the way that it happened with Dark Horse ended up being, Connor came to us and was like, hey, my roommate gave me Fuck Off Squad. I loved it. Do you have anything else? And so we really kind of lucked into this one. And it worked out really well because I think it does fit well there. And we had such freedom with the book. There's always a concern when you start making something before you've signed it to someone of like, well, this book is half done. So are you going to make me go back and change stuff? That's what editors do, right? And we really, Connor gave us almost complete freedom to just really make the book what we wanted it to be, which I'm so grateful for, because there's so many scenarios where I could just see someone being like, oh, well, this seems weird, or like, that doesn't really work for our market, or, you know, this or that. And it worked out really well.
Or even just like for Dark Horse to be like, can you take the swearing out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of swearing in the book, and like a little bit of boobs, and it's not even like you're getting the benefit of like, ooh, sexy boobs and like Garth Ennis swearing. It's like sad hipsters saying fuck, and then like a couple scenes of a girl in a tub,
right,
crying and drinking wine. Like, it's not like cool boobs. It's like sad boobs, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean it is interesting. It's funny though, because like once I read the book, I was like, this feels like a really good fit for Dark Horse, because Dark Horse is one of the direct market publishers that's actually uniquely adept at book market books. So it actually kind of, and also they seem to be very conscientious about production value, which I think is probably very important for something like this. But okay, I have a few things I want to get to like after the book is done, but I have a few things I want to touch on really quick. I normally send myself emails as I'm reading a book for podcast reasons, and I think you guys might have surpassed my prep for Ed Brubaker last time as the most emails I ever sent myself. I sent myself 25 emails about this. One of them,
oh my God.
One of them is the location of the book. It takes place in LA. You live in LA. Do you love LA, hate LA, or hate LA?
I would say love hate.
Love hate.
Yeah. There are things that I love about living here. I love the weather. I love the environment. I love living in the city. I love how many, galleries and art people are here. But then, some of those stereotypes about LA people, there's some truisms there. Not all of it's great. The traffic is fucking horrendous. Some of that stuff is true. And, you kind of have to balance it out with being in a place that feels really energetic and where there's things to do and people who care about art and all of this stuff. And I think finding the kind of like pockets of people who are genuine and care about what they're making really makes LA feel much more welcoming, and we've been able to do that. But if you get into the wrong pocket of people, it's really fake, and there's a lot of the dialogue that's in the book is inspired by stuff we've overheard or interacted with personally.
A couple of the scenes are just like one-to-one things people have either said to Nicole that I've witnessed or stuff people have said to me. Please
God, tell me that cheesy lo mein as a bagel flavor is not something it's one-to-one.
No, that is not. No.
That sounds really bad. I'm not gonna lie. Like I could see wasabi. Like the person ordering 2 wasabis from that list. I'm sorry to get hyper specifics, but that bagel. Anytime there's something in a restaurant, I'm just like, all right, Hollywood Bagel Emporium. Let's talk about your menu because you guys need some work.
Yeah. So far, that is the only appearance of Hollywood Bagel Emporium. However, Shiver Me Burgers is in just about everything else that we've done. Like it's a major thing in the next book, and I don't think it's in Fuck Off Squad, but it's been in other stuff. It's
not in Fuck Off Squad.
Yeah.
It's the LA thing is interesting though, because I feel like there's a different version of this book where things work out well. Like, it's like where it's the healthy version of LA where it pushes you as opposed to swallows you whole and changes who you are. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, Nicole, where it's like is a bit of column A, a bit of column B.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think also that like in the right lens, this is a happy ending. This story is the happy story. This is every success story in LA is this story. That the issue is that it's just lionized and filtered through a lens of nostalgia, and you're not thinking about the compromises that Daisy Ridley had to make in her contract for Star Wars. You and I aren't aware of the fact that Daisy Ridley had to sign over her likeness for all time forever and they can do anything with it. And if once she dies, it doesn't matter. They can still make movies starring Daisy Ridley as a CGI automaton. You know what I mean?
I don't like that.
I don't like that either. But that's they're literally doing that with fucking Peter Cushing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this weird, like, every happy ending, not that there isn't such a thing as a happy ending, but that it's just everything there's always a cost. And I think that's what we were really interested in, is like telling a story set in this world and really illustrating, no pun intended, the cost and showing you what it takes to move through those systems.
Well, that is something that is a big discussion in LA, mostly because there are so many creative industries here. But it's really just making stuff. Like, if you are in a creative industry, there's going to be moments like this where you're going to have to make these decisions of, does getting ahead warrant me giving up half my media rights? Does, getting ahead warrant me working on a type of project that I don't want and possibly getting pigeonholed into that? And that comes directly from being someone who makes comics, having these discussions, having these opportunities come and go, where you have to kind of decide, is this thing going to benefit me enough that I'm going to take it, even though it's not perfect? I often say that there's no perfect win in comics, because every time I've had something really wonderful and exciting happen, there's always been something about it that I was really not happy with. Even the best of the best opportunities, there's always like, yeah, but like, oh, this part is really annoying, or this contract thing is weird, and I have to give up the rights to this for the extended universe, like the literal universe that's in these contracts a lot of the time, of like, you're giving up rights forever and always in the entire universe. So even though we don't have space travel yet, if we did, they still own it.
Yeah. It is interesting looking at some of the beats in the book from like a comics perspective. And I know a lot of people have kind of glommed onto them for that reason, because there is obvious overlap. But, like two examples. This isn't really a spoiler, but Stanley, Paradox XL, at one point, he like repeatedly insists that he is the creator of Tulip. Like, it's like this thing that he says, despite the fact that Becca feels like she's part of it. But then on top of that, I'm not getting into specifics on this either, but it's, let's say, the idea of like stealing ideas, or what's a generous way of putting it, re-envisioning them, is a core aspect of the story at one point. And it's interesting because those are, I mean, it's, Peter Cushing, comics, there's all kinds of examples of that. And it is interesting to see, because I know the two of you, beyond the formalistic stuff, you're believers in comics. You love comics. And it's interesting because it also feels like you're realistic about it too. You love comics, but you also know that these things, stealing ideas, claiming ownership for something that isn't necessarily yours, are very comic ideas within your comic.
I mean, to me, the amount of people in comics who have treated each other and the work well is like, you can count them on one hand. Like, I mean, just to, like, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, like, I know they had their falling out that they've now since patched up and everything, but like, for 25 years, those were the only that one unit was the only example of a comic book creator that made something that didn't get royally screwed over. They're the only example. And that's abhorrent to me. The fact that Siegel and Schuster, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, even Bob Kane, as much as he was a lying piece of shit, like, you know what I mean? Like, that dude sucks. But all of the luminaries of the field who established the visual language, Winsor McKay, the man who invented animation and almost single-handedly pioneered the visual language of comics that we know today. The fact that he got screwed over by Hearst so royally is like, that, it just shows you. And he was he was fortunate. He was a part of the comic strip world, which was treated much better than the comic book world. Because, I'm sure you know, David, the comic book world was largely founded by gangsters, like National Publications, which was the company that later rebranded themselves as DC Comics, was founded by, an ex-military guy and a gangster. And they used the Major, is his name, Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, as the front. And then Harry Donenfeld was a mob-connected kid who used Jack Cohen, who was his next door neighbor growing up's rum running money, to buy a printing press so they could launder money through the printing press and clean all of the mob's rum money. And then because of that, when comics started to become popular, they stopped publishing pulp novels and started publishing comics. And because the way that comics were tabulated, the way sales were measured, is they would literally print 1 million copies, ship them out, and then they would get returns. And however much the returns were, 400,000 copies, 200,000 copies, 600,000 copies, that's how they would know how many comics they had sold. So they could just say, oh yeah, we got 200,000 returns.
Oh,
so
God,
this is how we clean our money. Okay. And so those same guys are the same guys that screwed over Siegel and Schuster. Like, it's horrible when you look at the histories, the history behind the medium, and the way that same bullish, mobsterish, piratish approach to treating creators has filtered down into so many publishers that work today and just run IP farms where they rip off creators, push them out of deals, and pay them a penny, and then call it a day. Like, it's just horrible. It's abhorrent. It's bad for the medium. It's bad for the culture of comics. And you can feel it. Like, you can just look at the cover and be like, oh, that's an IP farm. Look.
And I think that the important thing here is that I think a lot of those companies don't even understand that what they're doing is bad, because they're just like, this is the culture. There's no money in comics, so we have to do this to make it work. You're getting part of the IP too, even though you created it whole cloth and it's completely yours. But we're putting up money up front to get this book published. So, we're taking the risk. And so we are deserving of your IP, when it's like, no, you're deserving of the profits or part of the profits from the book. Does that mean that you should be owning 50% or more of the IP so that you can go and sell this to film companies and make millions of dollars off it? No, but they don't even really I don't think in their heads it's bad.
Right. This is a crazy aside, but this reminds me of, I've been going to physical therapy lately. I was having these headaches and yada, yada, yada. But it was interesting. They were talking about reclining in your seat when you're on an airplane. And every single person besides me was like, oh yeah, it's like, it's totally fine. Just do it whenever you want. And I was kind of like, I told somebody, I was like, I think you're basically advocating for societal collapse. Because what her argument was, is everybody's doing it, why shouldn't I do it too? And I think that's kind of a similar argument. It's just like, it's the way things are. And I'm like, well, there's always a better way to do things. But okay, moving on from this really quick, I want to go to after the book is released. And I'm going to use a line that Dave used in the afterword, because I thought it was a personal affront to me. He said, don't get your name on the Mount Rushmore, you wouldn't get your name on the Mount Rushmore of comics by taking naps and going on walks. And as a person who goes on a lot of walks and actually does take naps, how dare you? But I mentioned before we started recording, you have done a lot of interviews. You've been on a lot of YouTube shows. You've been on a lot of podcasts. I am not special in this regard, but I like to still feel special. But
you're special to me, David. You're special to me.
Thank you. But that's the interesting thing. You finished this book 6 months or further behind. You reached out to me 1 million years ago for this podcast. I'm interested in, how much of the work involving Tulip has come after the book was completed, because you still got to sell the book. You still got to get it out in front of people. Is a lot of it?
So much, bro. So much. So I basically have had, a ton of work. That's the thing that nobody talks about in comics. Like, I feel like,
you're a small business owner.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Without any of the glory of being a small business owner, because at least that someone can see at a shop front and be like, "You're really doing it, kid." But like with us, it's like, "Oh, you made a comic like for kids, like Biff Bang Pow." Like, no? Oh, comics, they still make those? Oh, okay, all right. But yeah, no, basically to answer your question, to try and get the word out about the book, because, you know, we are making a comic about compromise that's sad and, you know, doesn't have any punching. I have made spreadsheets of every comic book podcast I could find, every geek oriented culture podcast I could find, every podcast with the word nerd in the title, every podcast about self-publishing books, every podcast about being an artist and the process of being an artist, every podcast about being in like the movie world that's kind of tangential to comics. And I have sent all of them emails being like, hey, here's a link to the book. I'd love to talk to you. This would be really fun. Sometimes I lie and I say I'm a big fan of your show, even though most of them I haven't listened to.
Whoa. This is all a lie? Oh my god.
We both know that I listen to the show because I literally said to you, like, dude, you got to fix those levels. Like when I'm on the subway, I can't hear the show.
I still bring that up. You guys, you two were an impetus for change for the podcast. I've brought that up on this very podcast because after that, I found this thing called Auphonic that helps me fix my levels automatically. So I don't know if it's fixed things, but I do appreciate that. So anyways, sorry.
No, but that's one component of it, right? Is like reaching out to the podcast sphere to try and get people to cover the book, which I've been very excited about. How many people have been like, whoa, this looks so cool. And the like chorus from everyone that has been reading it is like, this isn't something I would normally pick up, but this was really good. And it made me think, and it made me ask all these questions and blah, 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 which was it's so fun to have those conversations. And then the other side of this is that I've also, which I think nobody in comics wants to talk about because it's a dirty little secret, in that there's no real solidified central way to interact with retailers. So my friend helped me and gave me a list of some retailers that he had. I compiled additional retailers, and I also went online and found some. And I have sent 1,000. I only know this because I was literally talking about somebody this morning, so I know the number off the top of my head. I have sent 1,662 retailer emails being like, hey, our book is coming out. This is what it's about. Here's a PDF of the book. I'd love you to pre-order it. We're also doing book plates. So if you want any signed book plates that Nicole's drawn on, please let me know, and we'll send you book plates. Also, if you want me to record a video for your store's social media channels saying like, hey, this is who I am and this is what the book is about, to try and incentivize your customers, happy to do that too. And, you know, like about 200 people have written back. Or not 200 people. We've sent out 200 book plates. I think
it's not 200 people.
Not 200 people that wrote back.
It's like
it's slightly more than that, but it's not much. Like it's this, you know, it's a hustle, man. You have to be out there beating the pavement. There's literally no one in the world right now that cares if our book succeeds or fails. They just don't. Like, I'm sure there's some people at Dark Horse, they're like, it'd be nice to get that money back, but they're not going to do the amount of work that I'm doing because I'm Nicole's biggest fan. I got to make sure Nicole can make more books, David.
Oh,
I got to send these emails so Nicole can keep eating, bro.
The other part of this conversation is that we have done so many of these comics podcasts, and we've sent so many emails to comics podcasts, but the comics industry as a whole obviously is not super recognized outside of comics. So it's this really like insular place to be in. And when you're making a book, especially a book like this, what would be nice is to extend outside of comics.
Right.
So when you're doing comics podcasts and doing comics interviews and stuff, that's really only selling anything to comics readers. And what we want is to extend outside of that realm. You know, it would be really great to be on NPR or blah, 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 or whatever, you know, and New York Times book review, which like those things are probably not going to happen. We're not big enough names and nobody cares about comics, but we're personally taking those long shots and sending emails to Cosmo and Vogue and, NPR and like all of these outside places. I just spent the 2 days ago, making a list of Instagram, like bookstagrammers, and like sending PDFs to all these people who, like, they're not going to read this book. They're probably
They might.
Actually, I got a yes. Well, I got a thanks for sending me the book today, which was nice. I don't know if she'll read it or if she'll, but this is someone who is a like novel bookstagrammer, and she was actually like, oh, I like comics. So I was like, yay. But, we're trying to take these long shots to try and reach people outside of this sphere of comics. And because there's no comics or money in comics, and because it, takes so much effort, and comics doesn't kind of believe in itself, there's very few places where you find these companies kind of pushing outside of that realm in a significant way. Like, and if you want to do that, you kind of got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And is it going to be successful? Probably not, but worth a shot.
I mean, I think this whole thing has already been successful. Like, our book got covered in Panel by Panel, which is my favorite comics journalism magazine. It's phenomenal. And the fact that we got a cover story in Panel by Panel is just, I could die happy. It's cool.
Yeah, it's great.
I'm saying the book's not successful. I'm saying that our attempt at expansion outside of comics may or may not be successful.
Yeah. No, well, and it's like you were saying, Nicole, it's just like the new adult idea, like the genre that you and your friends want to really tap into. It's weird because a lot of publishers don't even know what to do with that. It's just like this mystery. It's like, oh, I don't know if people in that world read comics. I'm like, they would 100% if you can get in front of the right person. I don't know. It's interesting. One of the ones that I've heard, like I've heard the Goodreads community can kind of make or break a comic that's in more of the book market realm, which is really, really wild. But yeah, I mean, that is one of the very tough things about doing all that. I will say I do like that you were releasing it online, because there's no conventions. You got to get the books in front of somebody somehow, and at least having that, you can get a taste for it, and you can decide, do I like this? Is this a thing that I would like to finish reading or keep reading or whatever? I think that was smart.
When Dave and I were in Europe on the trip where we birthed this book, we were walking around Paris in the subways and stuff, and there were literal like subway bus stop ads for like Corto Maltese and comics and all these things. And the fact that the United States doesn't think that that's going to help, doesn't want to invest in advertising in a way like, so many of these companies are happy to like, set up interviews with comic sites and this and that and book publisher sites. And that's great. But like, I want that dude who's never read a comic before to pick this book up because they saw it on a billboard. And because of the Wortham hearings and blah, 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 and all this really intense history, we just don't value comics as a culture. And so there's very few people who are willing to kind of put the time and effort into outreach outside of the sphere that we're in. And it was really like a shock when we went to France to be like, there's billboards for comics?
Yeah. I mean, you talk to somebody about like Angoulême or like any of the other big conventions over there, and people are lining up not for like they want sketches. They want to meet the creator. They want to meet the artist. And I remember talking to Box Brown about it, and he was just saying, he's like, I knew I had to come up with a few set sketches I would do in this book because I didn't want to disappoint them, because they were there for me, not for, I don't know, Plants versus Zombies or some nonsense like that. And I think it is interesting how the valuation is so different. But okay, to close, I am interested in, you're done with this. You've been done with the book for a while. You have Forest Hills Bootleg Society coming out from Simon & Schuster, which is a really big deal. It's like you guys are progressively building. We're talking about this book that just came out yesterday, June 30th, when we're recording. How far into Bootleg Society are you?
Oh, we're done.
You're done?
We done, baby!
A couple edits to do, and we've got some pre-press stuff. But yeah, I've finished, quote unquote, finished drawing it in like November.
That's wild.
And the thing about the book market is that their publishing schedule is so extended compared to comics.
It's a year out
That
or something, right?
really, hopefully, we haven't experienced it yet, but they really are going to spend like a year kind of putting this out there in the world before the book comes out. That's the idea anyway. We'll see what happens. I don't know what the process is really going to be like when we get there, but you know, I spent probably a year drawing it, and we've had kind of this weirdly leisurely schedule, which I didn't really in my brain while I was working on it understand, because I was like, I have to finish this. I'm like killing myself to meet my own personal deadlines. And then we've kind of, you know, had a lot of time to sit with the book and add pages and do edits and kind of design the covers and do all this stuff. And we haven't even started with any sort of press stuff because the book doesn't come out until I think summer of 2022. So
Right.
It's going to be a while till the book's out. But I've been done for at least, 6-7 months?
Dave is right. Art really is time travel. Damn. That's wild.
Hey.
Bring it back. I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting how a lot, I don't know where Dark Horse stands in this, but I remember talking to Gina Gagliano about the idea of re-promotion, and it's like promoting a book after it's already been released. And it's interesting how in comics, that's such a foreign idea in some ways. It's like promoting, you know, maybe something comes up that makes Tulip topical and all of a sudden you have something to connect it with and you can push it again. But for a lot of comics marketing, that is a very foreign idea. And I find that to be perplexing because that's the beauty of graphic novels. There's a timelessness to it. It's, you know, when did Bone really get popular? It was popular when it was in self-published in like 1991, but when it was published by Scholastic Graphics in its completed form, it was supercharged. And that's what can happen with these completed books. And it just doesn't happen very often. And I hope that Tulip gets that because it's a great book.
Yeah, supposedly the Dark Horse backlist does pretty well. But I don't know if that means, I don't know the level of effort that's put into kind of re-advertising that stuff.
Sure. So last question for you. I am interested in, this was a bigger project. Obviously, you've done other big projects since then. What did you learn from this? Like, was there something about Tulip that it seems like it was something you definitely put your heart and soul into, but was there something different about this? And like, did you have some real takeaways from this in terms of how you'll collaborate going forward?
I would say that this book is sort of the catalyst for the really extended amount of back and forth that Dave and I have on our projects, because we've always had back and forth, but this one really, because it started with me being like, "Ooh, look at these YouTubers, this is exciting," because it came from that kernel of like me thinking of something or thinking it would be a good idea to work on something, and then specifically because of that trip that we took where we were not touching, Dave wasn't writing a story, he wasn't doing anything, we were just talking about it. That really kind of kicked off the way that we've started working on projects afterwards, where we have a lot of back and forth, a lot more than we did initially. I would say that, and this is the first book that I did completely digitally, so it was a learning process for me, and I personally feel, I don't want to talk it up, but I feel like I figured it out to a certain extent. Not that I'm not learning things, not that I'm not changing things, but it really, like, my process has gotten pretty streamlined since I started it.
Yeah, for me, I think I would echo what Nicole said about, like, this is the project where we figured out what our, in air quotes, process is. But I would say that it is two very specific things about that process. And one is that this was when we started working on this book is when we started playing catch. We go to a park by her house and we play catch and we talk about the book. And we just throw the baseball back and forth and we pitch ideas or break character or whatever, and it's like our version of a writer's room. And then after I have a first draft of a script, we do basically like a table read where I'll play certain characters and she'll play certain characters, and one of us will read the scene description, and we'll sit down with our computers at a table and we'll read the whole thing out loud to each other. And whenever something is weird or bumps or whatever, we'll stop and I'll take notes, and she'll be like, Wait, hold on. Okay, so this character isn't in the scene. Why isn't this character in this scene? This should be a scene with that character. And I'm like, oh, of course it should be. And then I write it down. And so it's not even that it is. I mean, it is an organic, free flowing thing, but it's structured free form. You know, like now that we have these very specific, delineated. Hey, do you want to go play catch and talk about the book? Yes, I do. Okay, let's go. And then we do the thing, and like the physical activity of playing catch and the table read aspect for us bouncing the ideas back and forth. I really feel like you can just feel that in the work. Like I really think it breathes a very specific naturalism and a cohesion into the finished product that would not be there without it.
Oh man, I am so envious of the playing catch aspect. I actually was lamenting recently to my wife that I was like, I just want to play catch. It's nice. It's kind of like with the planes, though. It's like with plane travel, you can't do anything but do that, so your brain is kind of free. That's I actually played catch.
Do you have a glove, David? Do you have a glove?
Oh yeah, I grew up playing baseball. It was my favorite sport. The only problem is I have a permanently dislocated right arm, so theoretically, doctors tell me you shouldn't throw a baseball under any condition, and I'm like, whatever. Doctors, what do you know?
Why don't you get a soccer ball and kick it back and forth?
Ooh, that's a good idea. Yeah. That is a really good idea. I also played soccer. All right. I have some things to think about. This has been really, I've learned a lot during this podcast. I really appreciate you two taking the time, but that's all I have for you. Dave, Nicole, this has been a blast. Best of luck with everyone as Tulip, and take care.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with the writer and artist team of Everyone is Tulip, Dave Baker and Nicole Goux. You can find them on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and more, and their recently released graphic novel, Everyone is Tulip, through Dark Horse Comics. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Carl Kerschel. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at Carl Kerschel, and in his current Kickstarter for The Abominable Charles Christopher. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content, and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Bawan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Zach Thompson, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Megan Marsden, Brandon DePillos, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinckley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Felt Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Mian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfill, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.